Hey guys, David here. I'm super excited. I got something in the mail that I really want to check out, but first I need to make a little bit of space. Just give me a second, you'll see what I mean. Just get this out of here. Oh, heavy. Boom! I have received in the mail the Studiologic SL88 Grand. Now, if you've been watching our videos for a while, you know that we are big fans of Studiologic MIDI controllers, and I've been using an SL88 Studio model as my primary MIDI controller for several years. But how does it compare to the more expensive and supposedly much higher quality feel of the SL88 Grand? That's what today's video is all about. All right, let's open this up and see what's inside. Oh yes. I can already tell this is a whole different animal compared to the SL88 Studio. It is so heavy, you guys. 1, 2, 3. There we go. Here we go. Right there. So if you just put this in front of me and put some tape over the Grand and wrote Studio, and I didn't have to pick it up, I wouldn't be able to tell the difference at first glance. It appears to be the exact same form factor as the Studio, which I'm used to. But of course, with this more expensive model, it's all about the feel of the keyboard. Also, we've got a few goodies in the bag. So we've got sustain pedal. The Studio just comes with like a damper pedal, like one of those smaller rectangular ones. We get a full-sized pedal here. That's nice. And then we've got, I think, warranty card and universal power supply. But this guy can also run off of USB power, which is typically how I would use it. Now, I'm gonna resist touching the keybed for just one more second because I wanna talk about how we got to shooting this video in the first place. I went out and researched and decided to buy an SL88 Studio for my own home studio use several years ago. I ended up really liking the keyboard, and we shot a review video back then recommending that churches in the market for a new weighted action MIDI controller would be wise to check out the SL88 Studio. Then a year later, after I'd spent a whole year of playing that keyboard every single day, we did a follow-up video talking about how it had held up and whether we would still recommend it. After we released that video, and thanks for watching it if you were one of the people that did, a representative from Studiologic reached out to us and said that they saw the video and thought it was really cool and asked if we'd ever tried the SL88 Grand. I said no, but I'd always been curious, and they offered to send us one in exchange for an unbiased review. So this is not a paid advertisement, it's not a sponsored video. We're not receiving anything in compensation. They just sent us this keyboard and they have no editorial say over what I'm about to say. This is gonna be my actual response. And the thing I'm most interested in doing is comparing the Studio model, which I already own and love, to this more premium Grand model. They also sent me a couple of attachments that I'm really excited to check out too. Okay, here's one. So we've got this, what does it say? Magnetic accessory, Type A computer plate. And they've got an interesting rail system on the back of the keyboard that's magnetic. Also magnetic accessory, Type A music stand. Let's set the keyboard up first, and then later on, we'll check these out. This is very, very similar to the SL88 Studio in terms of the connections. So I'm able to just take the same exact way to set things up. Sustain pedal, I'm using a MIDI port. This is actually just so we can capture MIDI for this video. The actual MIDI that I'm gonna count on is gonna come over this USB, and this is also providing power to the unit. So plug that in, power button right here, and then we are good to go. You've got more ports for controllers. You have MIDI in and 2 MIDI out, so it's a pretty versatile controller. Now, my favorite thing about the SL88 Studio, I'm pretty sure it might be my favorite thing about the SL88 Grand too, is all of this free space, and I can just set my iPad right on top. And because of the magnet in the back of my iPad, it's locked in place. And then this single USB-C cable plugged into my iPad. I've got a USB hub just off camera, and that's gonna power the entire rig. Okay folks, this is it. iPad's connected, keyboard's turned on. I'm just gonna play a couple notes and then we'll talk about what I'm playing. The moment of truth. Ooh. Whoa. Oh. Okay. expecting, but it's not what I was expecting. It's good. I think you've probably figured that out. I guess I just wasn't expecting how different it would feel. Wow, okay. Studiologic, this is a pretty remarkable difference. It's better than I thought it would be. So if you don't know of the company Studiologic, it is the consumer face of a company called Fatar. Fatar is a keyboard manufacturing company, a keybed, more correctly I think, manufacturing company based out of Italy. And they provide keybeds to tons and tons of different companies. Maybe for us worship folks, the most well-known company that uses Fatar keybeds is Nord. I think all of the Nord keyboards that are currently on the market use one or another keybed manufactured and produced by Fatar. So the SL88 Studio, which is the keyboard that I've been using and enjoying for several years, has a weighted action Fatar keybed inside of it. That's the Studiologic SL88. The keys are quite heavy, and it feels, I thought, felt quite realistic, very piano-like as I was playing. But the SL88 Grand that I've just played for the first time features actual wooden keys with a graded hammer action. That means there's a mechanism inside that physically moves when you press the keys. That's what makes it feel realistic. But unlike the Studio, this is a graded hammer action designed to more accurately replicate the feel of playing a real piano. Because on a real piano, not all of the keys respond the same way across the keyboard. There's actually a weight applied to it to ensure that the output of the piano is balanced. This is something you wouldn't really notice because it's just how pianos work. Piano tuners and piano manufacturers do all of that thought for you, and then you just get to enjoy the instrument. You don't notice that it's missing until you get it back. And that's really the moment that I experienced as I played this keyboard for the first time. I really, really love my SL88 Studio, but the SL88 Grand, in my initial reaction, is that there's another level of realism that I didn't recognize I was missing, but now that I know it's possible, it's gonna be maybe a little bit more challenging for me to go back to the Studio model. The other thing that really sets this keyboard apart from the Studio is what Studiologic calls the Ivory Touch finish on each wooden key. It has this coating that attempts to replicate the feel of actual ivory keys, like on a very expensive high-end grand piano. So there's more texture to these keys. They're not coarse, but there's just this little bit of responsiveness that allows your finger to sort of catch on it. It very much feels like another level of realism compared to other MIDI controllers I've played and compared to the SL88 Studio. So like I said before, the connections are quite simple, but also robust. You've got several ports on the back for sustain, various pedals and continuous controllers, a MIDI in, 2 MIDI outs, and USB. And the SL88 models, both the Studio and the Grand, also can send 2 different virtual USB ports. So out of a single cable, if you ran it into a splitter, you could go to 2 different devices and send different data to them, which is really, really cool. So out of that single USB port, you get double functionality. For me, my connections are always quite simple because I'm using software. So my iPad is running USB-C into a USB hub that's powered, and then that USB hub is just connecting straight to the Studiologic over USB. But if you prefer to use traditional MIDI, then you have tons of flexibility there too. Just like the Studio model, we've got 3 joysticks on the left side. This to me is sort of my least favorite thing about the Studiologic SL series in general. I like these joysticks for like pitch bend and modulation and stuff for momentary things, but I would love to have a single heavy mod wheel in one of these positions that was just a little bit larger, more tangible, so that when I'm making these fine-tuned adjustments in the moment on stage, I don't have to be quite as precise or careful. It's very easy to accidentally flick this joystick up or down or overcompensate as you're trying to make a subtle motion. So I really wish there was maybe a new version, Studiologic, if you're watching this video, that has one actual sort of larger dial style mod wheel control. The software that's running inside of the keyboard, I think we're gonna have an identical experience to what we have inside of the Studio. So you can run up to 4 different zones at a time. You can choose what MIDI port they send out on, so you could send one section to your MIDI out 1, MIDI out 2, USB 1, and USB 2. You can send on different channels, you can send program change, all sorts of different things. You can designate the volume, you can run splits, so if you wanted to send zone 1 only on the low end of the keyboard, so you were controlling maybe like a Moog Sub 37, and then your right hand, maybe you were triggering an analog synth or your software. You got lots of flexibility there. And we do have aftertouch and the ability to designate different velocity curves. Now, if you want to, you can choose a user velocity curve if you have very specific preferences, but you can't actually designate these user velocity curves here. You have to connect the keyboard to your computer and use the editor app that Studiologic provides at no charge. And then you could get very specific. But honestly, for most users, you probably don't need to get that specific, and you're going to find that the stock curve will suffice for your needs. Now, I just laid hands on this. I'm just speaking from my experience with the Studio, and I've never felt the need to adjust the velocity curve from the stock. So whether that ends up being the case with the Grand or not, that'll have to come maybe in a follow-up video. Now let's talk briefly about price. The SL88 Studio, which I've owned for several years, runs just over $500 or so on Sweetwater at the time of this video. And the SL88 Grand is available from the same website for about double that at just over $1,000. Neither the SL88 Studio nor this keyboard feature any built-in sounds at all. So for $1,000 with the SL88 Grand, you are buying just a MIDI controller. Your sounds are going to have to come from somewhere else. So this isn't your all-in budget. You're going to have to buy the keyboard and then an iPad or a computer or some other hardware keyboard that you're going to MIDI into. So for $1,000, it's a MIDI controller alone. Now, if you want this form factor with built-in sounds, Studiologic also has a line of keyboards called the Numa series that do have built-in sounds, and they also have the Fatar keybeds. The Numa X Piano is their flagship in that line, but it's a good bit more expensive even on top of the SL88 Grand. So for me, as a software guy, I'm content to just have a great controller and then trust my iPad or my Mac for all of my sounds. So let's talk a little bit more about the feel. You saw me react in real time, honest reaction, just a couple minutes ago to playing this for the first time, but I haven't really talked about what the major difference was. And it's a little bit hard to describe. My very first reaction is that these keys actually feel a touch lighter than my SL88 Studio. I've always felt that I really do need to dig in with the Studio in order to get those higher velocities. And that's always felt good to me. Like I have a lot of wiggle room and flexibility where even if I'm playing like mid-strength, I'm not getting too intense. And I really have to be purposeful to trigger those higher velocity notes. But here, I feel like if anything, it's just as easy to play with intention and avoid those higher velocity notes when I want, but it's not as difficult to be articulate in that space below full intensity, full strength, full velocity. I feel like it's a little easier under the hands. A little bit lighter in the touch, but also more articulate. I especially notice this difference when it comes to the lowest velocity notes that I might trigger during an actual set. So it's not hard to dig in and get to that full-on, all-in velocity. And it's not hard either to just play in the middle, but it's easier than that Studio to get to those really fragile, sort of quiet notes. I don't mean easier as in I'm more likely to get to them without intending to, or the keyboard is skewing towards the lighter touch or the lighter velocity. It's just my relationship to the instrument as I'm feeling how it responds. It feels smoother, it feels simpler, it feels a little bit more inviting. If money weren't a factor here, this is, in my opinion, clearly a superior and more inspiring keybed to feel. And it feels more subtle. It does make me wonder if I would have been better served by spending a bit more money 3-4 years ago and buying this keyboard straight away, skipping the Studio model entirely. Don't get me wrong, I've always enjoyed the Studio, it's just this level of feel is something I've not had. And the Studio has served me well. It's roadworthy, it's well constructed, it's lighter in weight, which is a big plus. But this just feels great. Sometimes after a full day of designing sounds, playing on the Studio keyboard, I would have some fatigue in my hands, some fatigue in my wrists, but even just in the fingers of repeatedly testing. You know, a lot of my work with sound design is really digging in and then lightening up and just going back and forth to test how things respond. And this feels so much less intense to achieve, but also just as in control, if not more in control. And that Ivory Touch on the keyboard really feels great. It does feel more realistic. There's just a touch of grain that's just really nice. It feels just pleasant under the hands. Okay, now I'm excited to check out these accessories that Studiologic sent as well. So yeah, this is the music stand, I believe. We've got these two, whoa, clearly magnetic boys. On the inside here, we have the music stand. Looks like that. So these are magnetic and they're saying it will hold your stuff, but if you want it more stable, you can also use screws. Boop. So then this guy just affixes, yeah, okay. So there, and then we can slide this one. Okay, and that's it. It's a music stand, so if I were just gonna, you know, put some sheet music on there, it'd be good to go. And then I could put this, yeah, right in the middle, for example. That's an easy adjustment, or I could put it all the way over here. So you've got this rail all the way across the back, which is pretty cool. I think I'd probably put the screws in if I knew that it wasn't going to move around a bunch and I just had one place where I wanted it, just so that if somebody walked by and bonked it, you know, they wouldn't take it off and it would clatter during a worship service or whatever. But it's really slick. It's super simple to install, and then just a couple screws and it's set up. This is nice and clean. It looks like it belongs. I kind of like that it's solid. It's not like a weird see-through frame or whatever. It's just really minimal and blends right in. So let's check out the other one now. Okay, much the same here. Two more magnetic little guys. So we put these here now. But now, instead of it hanging over the back, it has a, yeah, ooh. That feels way more responsible. And it's so clean. Like from the front, as you guys are watching this video, you know what, I think even if I were gonna do this, I would maybe even try and find a way. See if I can get this to come off. Wow, this one's really on there too. That feels more solid. I wonder if I can do it right there. Oh, yes! Then I would put it right here and it's just locked in, and you've got, you know, a little spot for like a little cup of coffee. So if we wanted to, we could do the rail thing over here for the music stand, and then have this here for holding the iPad or the computer. If you wanted to, you could have two plates, two of the computer plates, and just have like your tracks computer over here, and then have your iPad here or whatever. The price to buy one of these plates is a bit more than you'd pay for most laptop stands, computer stands, or music stands. But the benefit you get of keeping the stage really clean and having this be as stable as your keyboard is, instead of as stable as your music stand is on its own. Like, I would really feel good about having this on stage at church because it's not going anywhere. The keyboard's solid, so the stand is solid. So in comparison to the SL88 Studio, the big question is it worth double the cost? Roughly double the cost. And I can't answer that question for you. I don't even know if I'm ready to answer it for me. Like I said, I've been using the SL88 Studio for years. We've done 2 review videos on it, and I love the keyboard. But this feels distinctly different, distinctly better, and just more enjoyable to play. I think I'm able to get everything I need out of the Studio, but is it giving me everything I want now that I know I could have it feel like this instead? No, this feels better. I want this keyboard if money is no object. So it is going to come down to what's most important to you and your preferences. If you really value the most realistic touch possible, this to me is undoubtedly a better, more realistic feeling keybed to play, and it's easier on the hands. I think I could play this for hours and have way less fatigue and feel a lot better than if I were playing the SL88 Studio. I'll also say, for all of you churches out there who just want your keyboard to be red for some reason or another, but you are balking at the price of said red keyboard, the SL88 Grand has very similar keybed in feel and construction to the Fatar branded keybed that is in the Nord Stage 4. Nords are great, we love them, they feel great to play. This feels great to play like Nords that I have played, but at a fraction of the cost. And if you're using software for your keyboard sounds and you just like the feel, then this is going to get you that feel. It is more of an investment than the SL88 Studio, and there are also other keyboard options out there with hammer actions, with weighted keyboards that are less expensive than this one. But this is probably the best feeling standalone MIDI controller that I have any hands-on experience with. So if I were in the market to buy right now, and I had the opportunity to play the SL88 Studio and the SL88 Grand before making a buying choice, I think I would try to find a way to afford the Grand if that was feasible for me, especially if I knew I was going to be playing it regularly. It is heavier in overall construction. The durability, I'm going to assume, is excellent between both keyboards. As I said, the bodies are the same. The construction feels very, very good. You have wood keyboards here with this Ivory Touch finish compared to composite or plastic, I'm not sure, keys in the Studio. So there's a difference in feel there, but I think the overall quality in terms of how it holds up over time is going to be great either way. And Fatar, Studiologic have an excellent track record of long-term durability for all of their hardware, so I don't think that's an area where you'd really need to be concerned. So if you were in the market for a standalone MIDI controller and you wanted the most realistic feel possible, I think this is a pretty compelling option. I also think that these accessory plates for a worship team are an added value that I'm aware of you really can't get anywhere else on the market. I think maybe there's some other attachments for other brands of MIDI controllers and things, but this is so seamlessly integrated, it feels completely native and it looks completely native. And I think that's very compelling. It's sort of like an Apple-esque design aesthetic of like, how can we make this extra thing just not even appear to be a thing and provide the functionality alone? And I really, really appreciate that, especially this computer plate, which I'm using as an iPad plate. To me, that's an immediate upgrade over the way I have been doing things. And if I had the option to take one of these with me everywhere I went, I think I probably would. And I'm pretty sure this would fit in my backpack. So I'm going to be shopping for one of these, whether I'm using the Studio or if I end up getting a Grand for myself. So my initial thoughts, there are pros. Are there any cons or downsides to this? Price is the main one, I think. It's more expensive than most standalone MIDI controllers out there. It is on the heavy side because there's a lot going on mechanically inside. That's only a downside if you're going to be moving the keyboard around. I really wish it had a mod wheel. I really, really, really wish it had a mod wheel. To me, that is the biggest sort of almost fatal flaw in this guy. But at the end of the day, I am also using the touchscreen of my iPad more often than my hardware controllers these days. So it's a compromise, one that I've been doing for years with the Studio model. It's just not my favorite thing. I wish it had honestly like a Nord style, like that stone sort of at an angle mod wheel that's on like the Nord stage models. Something like that on the SL88 would be an absolute godsend. So that to me is a downside for sure. Other than that, I think it really just comes down to figuring out if you want to spend your church budget or your personal budget here, or if you want to put that in other places. You could buy the Studio model and then buy a really, really great synth plugin, or even like a baseline iPad to power your rig and still be at about the same price point as this keyboard alone. So it's a matter of priorities. It's a matter of budget, what order you want to do things in. I think if you buy the Grand or the Studio, you should plan to use it for a long time. I think it will last. I've had a great experience personally with the reliability of the Studio model. After initially checking this one out, it feels very much the same in terms of its construction quality. So I guess if you're choosing between the Studio and the Grand specifically, you got to figure out how long do I want to play this thing? Do I want a heavier feel? Because the Studio might actually be for you if that's the case. Or do I want something that feels very natural, very balanced, and that's very responsive? And in my opinion, the Grand is clearly a league above the Studio in that regard. I'm going to put a link in the description to the review I did of the SL88 Studio from a couple years back before I'd ever touched the Grand, so you can hear my unfiltered opinion on that keyboard, because I love it. I still do. Studiologic, it was super cool of you guys to be willing to send us this so we could do this review video. I think it's a great keyboard, so thanks for taking the time and being willing to let us check it out and these accessories as well.